Yeah, a little bit windy, making a response video to Pyro on the Drake equation. He also did this stupid relativity thing again, where all reality apparently is some sort of relative abstract, and we can't define any truth except from our relative position, which is kind of silly. From relative positions you can deduce absolute position. You can see things from perspectives that are not your own, if you have enough information about the dynamics of a circumstance. So you can see things from a high probability of accuracy from a perspective that is not your own. Somebody could have drawn planet Earth without us going into space to take a picture of it. And it could have been a highly accurate drawing. I mean, all the continents would be where they're supposed to be, and the oceans would be where they're supposed to be, and the size would be correct, because we had enough information to see that perspective from that perspective. So that's just kind of crap. Now, okay, now on the Drake equation stuff. Sorry, I'm I'm having a lot of anxiety today. This is shit. Anyway, there's just so many variables. There's, okay, so you got these 7 things in the Drake equation, right? But there could be 19, there could be 35 variables that you can identify, substantial variables. Ones that'll be tricky to identify and that will really be decisive in deciding whether a reproducing piece of chemistry develops on a particular space, in the universe. And it's just made up numbers, and so there's no point in even talking about, well, 3 of them we can almost figure out. Well, yeah. So we're halfway there, and the 4 that are left are the hard ones. It just doesn't mean much. It doesn't mean anything is what it doesn't mean. And the whole point of people bringing it up is that people do fill in the variables, Pyro. They don't just sit there and leave it alone and just say, well, it's interesting to contemplate. No, they pull a number out of their butts and say it's like 1 in 1,000 Earths will have a living thing on it. Well, I guess if it's exactly like Earth and it sits around for a few billion years, the chemistry sloshing around, I guess that's true, if you make it identical enough. But what's the probability still? We don't know exactly how improbable the mechanism was. So even if you had the same conditions, let's just duplicate the condition of the sloshing sea. So we have all this, you have all the elements, known elements in the sea. And it's just sloshing around and sloshing around. So you have to have a planet first that has all the known elements, or most of them, and then it has to also have this sloshy sea thing. It has to have some way to mix these elements. It can't be frozen and it can't be vaporized. So they have to have this liquid form constituent, which complexifies this whole equation. But anyway, let's say you have that happens 1 million times or 1 billion times. I mean, who cares how many times? We know from the Earth experiment that it was only DNA that came out of that thing. There wasn't some sort of silicone life form that was previous. There wasn't some other thing. Because there's no reason to think that a life form sufficiently different enough wouldn't be able to coexist with life. And the whole game, what's not in the Drake equation is what is the probability of, here's an obstacle. So you can just pull these obstacles out, because you can just, you start thinking about what evolution requires, and you can start coming up with all kinds of new barriers. So there was a significant barrier that life ran into, was the reproduction problem. Because the first life form reproduced. It didn't have a mortality. So the first life forms had to be killed. They had to be killed by the environment. They had to die by attrition of some kind. They didn't have it programmed into them to die. They probably had no such thing as a lifespan. Those first little mechanical reproducers. And so what happens when they just keep reproducing, and they exhaust, they completely pollute their environment, and that's what they basically did. They created a whole different oxygen environment, a whole different biosphere, and they had to survive the transition. So they had to survive the transition from, which basically required them to eat their own shit. They had to basically turn into shit eaters and food you know, food shitters. So they had to shit food and eat their shit. I mean, they had to do exactly the opposite of what they were doing before. And they also had to acquire some mechanism to stop them from always spiraling in terms of population out of control to a point where they would exhaust all the resources or all the space, the available space, and the reproduction would become toxic eventually to a point where it would destroy whatever life existed, because it couldn't survive anymore. It couldn't move or mechanically do anything. I mean, the first life didn't move, but it would still require, to maintain its structure to some extent, it would require energy, one presumes. Even to reproduce again, it required energy. Well, anyway, but that's just one example, and you can go through all the levels of evolution what it takes to get to intelligence and a nervous system and the creation of sentience, and then the creation of an intelligence that's able to do the abstract thought thing. It only happened to one primate organism that did the expanded vocabulary thing and had the brain resources, had a brain constructed in such a way that it could change the balance of how the brain was used. It's not like we don't have it's not the size of our brain that's the key to this whole thing. It's the use of our brain that's the key to this whole thing. Yes, you have to have a certain minimum size to get to the point we're at, but it's not just about size. It's about configuration and how the resources in the brain are used. Because obviously our ancestors didn't have all this complex knowledge. So they were given a brain capacity that was way above what they were capable of using, because they hadn't acquired any information to put into their brain. They hadn't acquired a vocabulary before they acquired a vocabulary. So this is a strange phenomenon in itself, and this may very rarely happen in nature, where it gives you a potential ahead of time, or when it is able to give you, where it's able to open up a door to a huge potential that you may not use for thousands of years, because usually most of those attributes will die off. You won't retain something you're not using substantially, or that doesn't give you substantial benefit. And it might not have been a very substantial benefit in its early days, because we really, although we were more capable, it was a minor change without information. So anyway, but anyway, that's why people harp on it, though, is because people misuse the equation to justify all kinds of phantasmagorical presumption that the universe is life-rich. And even the whole idea of calling it, like I said, this whole word life maybe needs to be reconfigured, because people have it's caught up with too much emotion, and they're not recognizing what life is. Life is an infestation of reproducing matter. It really isn't. I mean, this glamorizing of it is bullshit. It is a phenomenon of matter where it reproduces itself, and that in and of itself is not magic. It's not beautiful. It's not fantastically interesting and spectacular. It's potentially dangerous, because those living things end up having to cannibalize each other. And if they end up sentient, that has a consequence that can't be denied. And the fact that they must die, they must be killed by the mechanism somewhere, because it's always going to be a reproducing mechanism. That's the natural way. The reproduction is going to have dominance, and so it's going to have to recreate their recessive gene of death to exist as a life form. So anyway, I mean, just a bullshit video. I mean, this defending nonsense science, friendly science, happy science, playful science. That's all this is. It just degrades science. It degrades the integrity of the conversation, a scientific discussion of what our reality is. Our reality isn't phantasmagorical, whatever, interstellar communication with other intelligences. If there's another intelligence out there, it's stuck in the same dilemma we're stuck with. It's going to face not only the nuclear problem, not only the technology problem, but then it's going to face the real dilemma, which is, oh hell, our whole existence is based on a stupid piece of chemistry acquiring the capacity to reproduce, and just end up doing that in so many animated and silly ways.